Hi, angel faces. I hope you're all doing well. I hope your journeys are enriching and illuminating and that you're generally enjoying life on planet Earth. I've been thinking a lot more really about my own journey towards healing, particularly with regard to stuff like my long-standing issues with self-harm. As many of you guys already know, I self-harmed habitually for about 7 years of my life. And I also struggled on and off with some food control issues and with some behaviours that were definitely not healthy, and were kind of a way for me to relinquish control over parts of my life that I found scary or parts of my psyche that I was unwilling to get in touch with. And I was thinking really about what it would be like to draw a roadmap for somebody else of the journey that I took towards healing and what all of the different components were really in my own healing journey. And I think the important thing to remember before you begin with an exploration like this is that your journey in and of itself was your journey, right? It was completely unique to you. There is no way to transfer everything you've learned 100% to somebody else and have the exact same outcome. No matter how positive it was for you, somebody else's psyche and somebody else's perspective and somebody else's human experience is going to be different. And I think that's why a lot of people talk about the importance of not abandoning your critical thinking when you are reading material that's to do with personal development or self-help, ending negative cycles, releasing limiting beliefs, going after your goals, etc. There's so much beautiful advice out there, and it all comes from a very positive and well-intentioned place, and it comes often from people who have dealt with their own struggles and come out the other side and want to posit advice to you from heart level, and that is really special. But I think it's really important that you don't abandon your critical thinking when you're reading through this material or watching these videos or whatever you're doing. It's good to take inspiration from people, and it's good to see what you can find in their journey that resonates with your own. But it's really important never to berate yourself if you try everything that they tried that they said worked for them and it didn't quite flick your switch or float your boat. That's okay. Your journey towards healing is going to be unique to you. So what I would say is, as I'm reading through the notes that I've made and I'm talking about my own roadmap towards healing, my intention really is for you to just take what you can from it. It's not for me to kind of illuminate you on this pathway that's 100% effective and that, I recommend that you should take and I guarantee it or your money back or anything like that. It's just my personal perception of what my roadmap was towards mental health and towards self-love and towards self-dialogue. So here we go. I started by writing invite self-love, a practical reason to focus on self-love. You will not be able to stop your negative habit for someone else, no matter how much you love them. It might seem romantic, valiant, or selfless to state that you'll change in order to make the people you love happy, but it's usually a dead end. And this may leave the people that you've made promises to feeling hurt and let down, so it actually causes more issues. This is your journey. You are the one in control. You call the shots. You need to put yourself at the centre of it. So I suppose what I'm doing here is I'm kind of qualifying self-love as an important stepping stone, as one of the first important foundation stones to be laid down for you to build upon. And I think a lot of people, when they are dealing with feelings of self-loathing or even just detachment from the self, nihilism, high risk of self-neglect, self-negligence, just not looking at what their needs are, what their desires are. They're completely out of tune with what their soul is asking for, what their body is asking for, that kind of shit. That was me a very long time ago. And when you're in that place, the road towards self-love can look completely impossible. I think that one of the most important ways to get to self-love is simply to have a complete moment of surrender. And I know that sounds really abstract, but it's actually as simple as a moment of radical acceptance, which is what I'm going to come on to. I believe the seed of self-love starts at the moment when the status quo becomes untenable. If you are in a cycle of self-loathing, if you really don't care about yourself, if you really don't see why you should care about yourself, if you have a very low opinion of yourself, if you're listening to all of this stuff about the importance of self-esteem and self-worth and it's completely going over your head or even making you feel worse and you feel like that is a door you will never have a key to, I've been there. Completely been there, and I totally believe that door would never be open to me. And I think that the seed of self-love came in this dark night of the soul, really, this stark realization that the cycle that I belong to could not continue. And I think for a lot of people it works like that. So there's this negative cycle and it's incredibly vicious and it's incredibly destructive. But somehow we can always be one step away from the moment of radical acceptance. We can always kind of tell ourselves that it's okay, or that it's manageable, or that it's not as difficult, dangerous, dark, destructive as we think, or as the people around us think. We tell ourselves that we can continue in denial, we can continue on this roller coaster, and there's no reason to get off. And it's only at the point where the status quo becomes spiritually and emotionally or even physically untenable that you have this dark night of the soul, you have this intense moment, and it's a really potent moment where it's just you and yourself in a dark room, and it's almost like then you have to talk to yourself. You have to have that moment where you peel back all of the layers and say, I can't do this anymore. And that's where the seed of self-love is born. It's just born in a moment of self-realization like that. And yes, you have to build on it. And yes, you do have to build on it. You have to write yourself love letters. You have to connect to your core strengths, your signature abilities. You have to connect to your inner child. You have to remember who you were before all of the conditioning and before all of the outside expectation and before all of the rage, before all of the self-loathing, before all of the comparative thinking. You have to get back to your archetypes. You have to get back to how you used to find your joy when you were 5. You have to work on it steadily. But I think that the seed of self-love quite often comes at the moment where the status quo becomes untenable. We cannot accept that destructive cycle anymore, no matter what it is, whether it's to do with the lovers we choose, whether it's to do with the limiting beliefs that stop us from getting what we want, whether or not we're messing around with razor blades, whether or not we're messing around with food, we're eating too much for comfort, we're eating not at all for control. All of these cycles, I think that the moment where they become untenable is the moment where you have an opportunity to hold your own hand for a moment in that dark realization. And it is dark. It's really, really scary. I always call it like a kitchen floor moment because it is so overwhelming, it's so scary. That moment where you recognise that you cannot go on as you are, that you have to have some inner dialogue of some kind. People take years to get to that point in a great deal of cases because it is scary shit. It's a moment of pure realism. And it doesn't support any of the lies you've told yourself. It doesn't support any of the crap you've told yourself. It is you in that moment of pure authenticity, being completely raw, being completely honest and saying, no more. This has to stop. And that is terrifying, but it's important. When you get to that moment, you realise that this is the point where you can feel self-love, maybe even for the first time, or for the first time in a very long time. So when people try and stop for somebody else, like I tried to stop self-harming for somebody else without dealing with my issues, and it led directly into an eating disorder. Okay, I stopped one cycle and another cycle began because the cycle itself was not the cause. It was merely a symptom of some much deeper shit, and you cannot just rely on the love that you feel for other people in your life to help you stop that cycle. That's going to be junk food. That's only going to last for a little while. It doesn't matter how much you love those people. It doesn't matter how much you want to make them happy. It doesn't matter how scared you are of disappointing them. If your only reason to stop is for your child or for your husband or for whoever, your mother, your father, your friends, if they are your reasons and you don't actually factor in, then you're always going to end up back at square one. That is what I genuinely believe. There needs to be at least a seed of self-love within you that you are prepared to nurture and grow. It can't just be for other people that you change yourself. You have to know that you deserve to stop the limiting cycle for you, to stop the limiting belief for you, because you deserve to flourish. Not just because somebody else wants to see you flourish, but because you know deep down in your soul that you want to and that you deserve to have a better life. So I really think self-love is integral to the plot. It really was for me. And the next thing that I wrote was invite radical acceptance. The moment when I fully opened my eyes to the following things was the moment at which healing became truly possible. What was in my control? What was not in my control? Who I could really trust and turn to? What my core abilities were? How much I wanted to heal and get real from heart level. These were really important steps for me, and radical acceptance, I feel, is really just the stripping back of what if and if only. Okay, so we're basically looking at what they would call in positive psychology time perspective. We're looking at stripping away all negative, all unhelpful, all counterproductive time perspectives. So if you are future tripping hard, if you're completely obsessing over what's going to happen in 5 years' time, or you're completely obsessing over the status anxiety of where you need to be in 6 months, where you need to be in a year, if you're looking at the outside world all of the time and projecting your fears and anxieties into really strong visions of what you need to be and what you need to have achieved and how bad you're going to feel if you haven't achieved those things, you're not able to invite a moment of radical acceptance. And the same thing if you are just psyche diving all of the time. If you're not in the here and now, because you're constantly obsessing over what happened in the past, if there's regret, if there's an inability to forgive, if there's an inability to ask for forgiveness, if you are obsessing, if you are in that architecture of nostalgia or sentimentality that won't allow you to see what there is right now, what the starting point is, what there is to work from, again, you're not inviting a moment of radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is what you have and who you are right now. It is pure honesty, it's pure authentic realism, and that is the cornerstone from which everything else can be built. Now, radical acceptance often kind of comes into your life when you least expect it, and it blindsides you. It can happen while you're just walking down the street, or it can happen if you wake up from a bad dream and you go to the kitchen to get yourself a glass of water and suddenly you just have this overwhelming feeling, and it is a moment of radical acceptance. It's where you see you and you see everything around you as it is right now in this moment. What resources do you have? What resources do you not have? Which dreams is it okay to let go of? How can you be mindful? How can you be in your body right now and just go from this starting point rather than thinking, when I have that, I'll be happy, or if only I had that, I could start. If only I had that, I could begin. When I get that, I'll feel worthy. All of those thoughts are stripped away in the moment of radical acceptance, and it can come out of the blue. However, a lot of the time we can invite radical acceptance, and the first step towards inviting radical acceptance is understanding what it really is, and that's why I'm explaining it to you. If you need some doors to get into radical acceptance, I really think things like meditating and path working with tarot have been very instrumental for me, and I'm going to talk in a little while about tarot in relation to emotional healing. I also think things like automatic writing are great for moments of radical acceptance. You're peeling back the layers in a way which is controlled, but in a way which requires your will and requires your sense of desire to actually get down to what's there, to get down to what's at the bones. I also think that radical acceptance can be massively invited by anything which promotes the mind-body connection. I think that people can just become too transcendental about their thought processes, particularly when they're spiritually centered to start with and they're going through some issues with shifting or healing. Sometimes just getting into the body, for me, has invited some very poignant moments of radical acceptance when I was right at the beginning of my journey of healing. And I didn't realise how much I needed to just be mindful and to be in the present. And sometimes when you don't feel that you can do that emotionally because there are too many fears and too many anxieties, then all you need to do is do it physically. By just going for a walk in a park, enjoying a long bath, focusing on the breath, just centering, just simplifying, just shutting out, even for 30 minutes, the status anxiety, those unhelpful niggling time perspectives that are really just not helping you to break through and understand what the pathway towards healing needs to look like. Simple mind-body connection, which is really just relaxation, okay? You don't really think that anything massively spiritually or emotionally significant is going to come of it, but quite often it does. Quite often that is the case. I will talk more about radical acceptance in another video. I do really feel like it is a hugely important stepping stone on the road to healing. I don't think that you can be realistic about what needs to be done unless you've been realistic about where you are right now and you've, in a sense, let go of the life that you're supposed to live. I really feel like there's so much pressure, there's so much expectation, there's so much conditioning, there are so many projections from other people which are placed onto us over time. They're placed onto us by our parents and our extended family, they're placed onto us by society, they're placed onto us in school, they're placed onto us through the connections we make and through the relationships we have as we grow older. They're placed onto us through our various different perceptions of ourselves according to the mood we're in, or according to any failures, or according to any triumphs we had. And this can make moments of radical acceptance so difficult because we are constantly thinking about what we should be and what we should have and the life we're supposed to have lived. For me, my family, particularly on my father's side, were incredibly sure that I would be like a really famous actress or some theatrical rock star or some incredibly famous published writer by the time I was knee-high to a grasshopper. They were convinced of my brilliance. And this was extremely restrictive for me because I grew up with this huge amount of status anxiety. I really felt like if I didn't get to where everybody suspected I should go, then that was going to come back terribly badly on me, and I connected it to my self-worth intimately. My sister, on the other hand, she was always seen as one of those women who was going to be a homemaker and a mother, and she was a lot prettier than me. So there was this idea that she was going to be a perfect wife and probably keep a perfect kitchen. Again, this is hugely restrictive. This is conditioning. This is projection from adults. And they do it with the best of intention. They don't think that it's going to screw you up. But of course, it inevitably does, because you grow up wanting to feed into that projection and you connect your worth to that projection. And it's so important that you stop doing that, because that, again, is an absolute blockage against radical acceptance, which is so important. When you let go of the life you were supposed to live, and I know that a lot of people watching this will know what I mean by that. That life that in your mind's eye you always imagined would be yours, or that adults around you always said would be yours, or implied would be yours. And then you grew up and you realised that life isn't that simple. You know, that the unexpected occurs, the chaotic occurs, you shift, you transition without meaning to, you go through stages where you can't function emotionally, you go through stages where you're paralysed by fear, you go through stages where you invest your trust into the wrong people. All of these things happen that were not in the brochure. Okay, so you are sold this life that you're meant to live, and the moment of radical acceptance is the moment usually at which you stamp that life that you were supposed to live underfoot. You smash it into 1,000 pieces and you decide, no, the life I was supposed to live is the life I'm living right now, and I am exactly where I need to be. And that's where the core really strengthens up, I think. The next thing I wrote is recognise and release victimhood. It is right and healthy to be conscious of the pain you've experienced and how it's negatively affected you. That is a normal part of the process, but it's important to make sure that you don't drop anchor there. Victimhood becomes your normality when it's more desirable to justify standing still than it is to instigate changes. It's easier to identify victimhood mentality in other people than in yourself. So this ties in with radical acceptance intimately. I had to get seriously honest with myself about the extent to which I was holding myself back and how I was actually scared of leaving my self-harm behind because I didn't know who I'd be without it. So you're taking the negative cycle, you're taking the limiting belief, you're taking the emotional pain that you're in, and you're actually connecting it intimately to your sense of identity in a lot of ways. Many people don't actually want to invite wholly the journey of healing, because they don't know who they would be on the other side of their depression. They don't know who they would be on the other side of their eating disorder. They don't know who they would be if they suddenly knew that it was unhealthy and they were unworthy of being attracted to men who hit them. These cycles become part of the identity, and victimhood itself becomes comfortable. It's a blanket mentality, and I truly believe that. I did a video a while ago called Healing, Shifting, Unity, and in that video I talked about how many people who are in a massive amount of ongoing emotional pain as the result of cyclical thoughts or behaviours believe that they would do anything to get away from that pain. But actually, years later, when they have healed, they look back and they realise that they were only staying in that cycle for all that time because they wanted to be there. It was more comfortable, it was more reassuring, they knew where they were, they knew what to expect, there was no sense of the unknown. They were allowing that negative cycle to keep them exactly where they wanted to be in order to feel safe and secure. Yes, I know I'm a screw up. I know I always go back to this cycle. This cycle is warm, it's safe, it's what I know, it's what I have, it's what I own, it's what's mine, it's what reflects me, it's what people expect, it's what I project to the world. When we are totally surrendering, when we are totally opening up to healing, when we are saying, yes, okay, I'm ready to heal no matter what it takes, no matter what happens afterwards, I'm ready for the unknown because I know it's going to be better than what's here right now. I know it's going to be better than the unknown. I know it's going to be better than what I know. That is a hugely bold move. That's a hugely bold, assertive thing to do. It takes for you to really be standing in your personal power. Victimhood really comes and stays because we're too scared of the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen after we've healed. We don't know who we'd be if we weren't shrouded in that misery that keeps us so warm and so comfortable. For some people this might seem really difficult to understand, but I know from my perspective that I stayed in my cycle a long time because I was scared of what would be on the other side of it, and I really started to connect my pain with my identity. It was a part of my identity and I didn't know what I would replace it with. So that was scary to me. The next thing I wrote is find a positive creative outlet. It takes so much bravery to place your fears, anxieties, and disappointments into something tangible. So many people want to keep their responses bottled up, afraid to actually go through them. But buried inside, they only end up being deeply confusing and serving to keep you stuck. Once you begin to see art as therapy, you can see your emotional responses as they occur, charting your evolution, charting your territory, and permitting you a very important release. I discussed this in my last video about creative endeavour as soul medicine, and I really feel for me that using therapeutic journaling as therapy and really allowing myself to go there and really allowing myself to strip stuff back was very important for me for two reasons. The first reason is that I was able to tangibly see my progress and know, yes, this is happening. This is not just in my mind. Committing it to paper almost felt like committing to it in a very real way. It was more than committing to it in my mind and my heart. It was committing to it in terms of being accountable to it. That book was there, those notebooks were there, and they were making me accountable all the time. And the second reason was that when I was writing about myself and journaling about myself and journaling about my progress, that in itself has to be an act of self-love. So many people don't go into things like therapeutic journaling or therapeutic art or allowing themselves that creative outlet to actually explore their pain because they don't feel that they're worthy of it, because they feel stupid giving themselves that time, because they convince themselves that there's always something more important that they could do instead. All of this kind of thing. So it's really a lack of self-love that keeps them from starting. So once you start committing pen to paper and you're really, really writing down the pain of your soul, your psyche diving, you are having to use at least a small shred of self-love to actually get yourself started on that endeavour, because you're having to convince yourself that you're worthy of it. You're having to convince yourself that it makes sense to give yourself time, to give yourself reassurance, to give yourself healing. To the detriment of anything else, you have to put yourself on the top of your priority list, and that takes a shred of self-love. So if you can do that even one time, then you know that, as Bukowski said, if you're losing your soul and you know it, then you still have a soul left to lose. And I feel that's intimately connected to the idea of self-love. If you are not prepared to reach out your own hand, to hold your hand inside, pull yourself out, find your soul, find your voice, find your words, find your power, if you're not prepared to do that, then this is seriously something that needs to be addressed now. This is not something that can wait. This is not something where you can convince yourself that the house needs to be cleaned more urgently. No, not at all. Soul work needs to come before that, because you've lost that little shred of self-love somewhere inside you. You need to connect to it. You need to connect to it shamanically. And one great way of doing that is to start writing. Just start writing, and you might feel stupid at first, you might feel awkward at first, it might be the first time in a very long time that you've connected to your inner voice, so it might almost be like your hand is an alien and you're not even quite sure how you're connecting your mind to what's coming out through the pen. But do it and keep doing it and practice, and it will become kind of more natural and more organic, and it will feel more exciting and more empowering as time goes on. Talk to yourself, ask yourself questions, check in with yourself, open up to inner dialogue and appreciate the relationship you have with yourself. When you're mindful of your needs and emotions, you're less controlled by fear, peer pressure, comparative thinking, or outside expectation. You don't have to like every single thing about yourself. Just don't hang up the phone to your inner voice just because you are flawed. It's about accepting those flaws so that they don't hold so much power over you. The source of self-love is self-acceptance, and that requires realism. Developing a close connection with my inner voice is a big part of what saved me from disappearing forever into emotional darkness and constant self-harm. My inner voice knocked on the door and said, I'm worth more, life has more to give to me, and I have more to give to life, and my soul is heavy and that's not right, and I'm going to unload it and polish it up until it shines like a mirror and I can really see myself inside it for the very first time. I don't think that needs any further explanation. I think talking to yourself, again, this is something where you have to touch on self-love. So many people just don't have that inner dialogue with themselves, and it's absolutely essential. It is so essential. It doesn't matter how many hundreds of friends you've got, how many people are helping you through. You need to be your own friend. I really feel like that's the baseline. I think that's one of the things that I kept returning to over and over and over until I finally learned that lesson. Until I finally became the centre of my own universe, and I knew that everything that I needed to get me through anything was inside. It's inside me. I have a ready-made and complete toolkit. I am, as Jung would say, self-actualised. I went through a process of self-actualisation, and I really feel that I did that through talking to myself, through learning to check in with myself and not feeling that it was stupid and not feeling that it was surplus to requirement, but knowing that it was absolutely intrinsic to the journey of healing. Embrace the process. It's simply not going to happen overnight, and that is the gift. And I've talked about that a lot. And I really feel that that's true. I really feel that if we could all arrive at the door of healing whenever we wanted to, we wouldn't be enriched. We wouldn't be illuminated. We wouldn't be able to teach other people what we've learned. We wouldn't be able to be expansive. We wouldn't be able to feel like we could achieve great things. Cry. It is a terrifying and wonderful gateway to joy. So many people are afraid of crying. They think that if they take the seed of one thing that they're really upset about and they start crying about it, it's going to open up the floodgates. And you are going to be crying for hours about everything from, you know, that thing your mother said to you 15 years ago to the fact that you're one day going to die. So many people don't want to open up that gateway. But I hugely, hugely recommend that you do. Of course. I mean, I think it's inevitable that I would be the kind of person that would be a huge fan of crying. I favour crying. And even now, at this very self-actualised stage in my process where I feel like I have healed, I mean, of course I shift and I transition and I evolve and I learn. I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly a student of life. But in terms of actually managing to put down the blade and have kept away from it for this long and feel completely healed from that negative cycle, I still sometimes get trepidation when I feel like I'm going to cry. I still sometimes feel scared because when you're opening up that floodgate, other stuff does come out that you hadn't really entertained for a while or that you thought you were over. But it feels so enriching and such a release after it's done. It's just feeling that fear and then doing it, actually letting go, actually surrendering. Invite transpersonal experiences. Committing body and soul slavishly to a destructive pattern such as self-harm or some kind of food-related behaviour inevitably means being self-absorbed. This is often something which is very difficult to witness without judgment, so people who are embroiled in a negative cycle choose not to witness it at all. Now that I'm fully healed, I'm comfortable with telling people that my world was very small back then. I lacked perspective. I was constantly protecting my ego. I was manipulative, secretive, deceptive, and constantly jealous. I needed a soul connection. I needed to refuse to see my body or my mind as enemies, but simply as two halves of an incredible vehicle which enabled me to experience this unique ride through the intense and profound gift of human consciousness. So it's really about transcending the ego. It's about looking at things from a much more expansive place. When you're embroiled in a negative cycle, you lack perspective a lot of the time. Your problems become the most important problems in the world. You kind of switch off from the wider problems, or what in positive psychology they would call the macro problems, and you become very micro problem orientated, and you become unable to empathise as much. You start to see your negative cycle as something that you must protect to the detriment of everyone and everything else. This is true with drug addiction. This is true with an addiction to any kind of control over food, any kind of secretive self-harm that you're engaging in, anything that you do not want to face in terms of what is beneath that and what needs to be healed. You will protect it, even if it means hurting people you love, even if it means stealing money, even if it means going against your core principles and your values and the things that you know deep down at soul level to be true for you. All of those things are thrown out of the window so that the ego can protect the cycle, because you don't want to accept what's beneath the cycle that needs healing and needs dragging out and needs exploring. So I think it's very, very important at some point on the journey towards fully integrating your shadow and fully healing. It's really important to take a look at what you're like when you are trying to protect that cycle. I mean, who I became when I was self-harming and restricting my food was absolutely nothing like what I would hope people would see me as. Nothing like what I feel I am really like at soul level. I behaved in a lot of ways that were completely contrary to my core values and core principles, because I was protecting all the time the ego. I was making sure that anybody who was asking me to look at myself was ousted from the circle. Anything that was trying to encourage a soul connection in me, I got rid of it. I didn't want to know. I had to protect the cycle all the time to the detriment of all else. And this is something that's really scary. So I think it's something that needs to be looked at when we're engaging in limiting beliefs or negative cycles. How do we behave? How do we put ourselves across? How are we around other people? How do we express love? What's the block, that comes from having these cycles that we need to defend? And finally, I wrote, turn to tarot. Every card will arrive at the right time with the right message, because even by shuffling and cutting the deck, you are committing to helping yourself, discovering yourself, and working alongside yourself. I really believe that tarot, picking up the deck again for me at that crucial time during my healing process, was a massive part of what actually got me to the end of it. Because when you've been in a state of self-loathing for so long, and a state of detachment from soul connection for so long, it's very difficult to start an inner dialogue and keep it going without feeling stupid, without feeling fraudulent, without feeling like this is bullshit, without feeling like giving in. So for me, tarot was, I always got it on hand, it's always near me. Tarot was the perfect way to keep the soul connection going. It was something that spoke back to me about myself. It was something that I could tune into. It was something that I could slot into. It was a jigsaw kind of feeling, so that even though I knew that it was just me on my own in a room, leveling with myself, inviting radical acceptance, surrendering to the idea of the unknown and of healing, tarot felt like a constant friend. It was a mirror of my own psyche. It was like a workbook. It was helping me. It was guiding me when I was actually linking in with my intuition for the first time in a very long time, for the first time since childhood. So I really feel like it's a huge tool for healing. And I really think, obviously, with tarot, you can take it as far as you want it to go. You don't have to take it all the way to the finish line. You can use it as a comfortable, holistic accompaniment to whatever you're doing in therapy, to whatever you're doing with your life coach, to whatever you're doing with art as a therapeutic endeavour. Whatever it is, you don't have to make tarot into the central spoke of your practice, but it's very, very useful when you're trying to have an inner dialogue and when you're trying to give yourself quality time. Blessed be, people. Much love to you all. I will be back over the coming month with videos about shadow work and videos about artistic endeavour for therapy. Shadow work obviously is a big theme for a lot of people around Samhain, so and I'm no exception to that rule. So I'll be back with you guys shortly, and in the meantime, blessed be, much love.